Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success. Today, Sarah is going to be going over using geography and geography searches in Alpha Anywhere, but we're also here to answer your questions. You could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. You could also send questions to guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com. Hello, Sarah, are you there?
I am here.
Excellent. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
All right. Let's get started.
There we go. I see it.
Oh, I still don't remember how to do this. There it is from the beginning. All right. Welcome everyone to Alpha Anywhere Q&A. As Dave mentioned today, we are going to be talking about geography search, not geography. We're not going to talk too much about that particular topic, but we are going to talk about geospatial data. What that is, how you store it, and one of the ways that you can query it or utilize it for queries in your apps. And we're gonna take a look at that today. So geospatial data is it's a term you may have heard before, or maybe this is the first time you've heard it. It's information that describes objects, events, or other features with a location on or near Earth's surface. So on Earth's surface would be an address. Near Earth's surface might be a satellite in orbit. And that data isn't just like a location or an elevation. It can be line segments, so think routes. It could be polygon data, so maybe the perimeter of a city or town or a country. And all this information can be stored in a database and queried. There are several databases that support this, and the data is either stored as a geography data type if it's available, or geometry. Geometry being a little more abstract. It can store data in other coordinate systems. Specifically with Alpha Anywhere, we only look at storing and querying geospatial data. But in terms of support, SQL Server supports it, as well as you can store this information in Oracle, DB2, PostgreSQL, MySQL. I believe also MariaDB supports it since it's spun off from MySQL. But in terms of what is supported and what you can do with it, this varies significantly between different database systems. So it's something you need to be aware of when you want to store geospatial data. And I'm not talking about a latitude and longitude value. We're talking about, again, line segments or polygon data, or a point stored as both lat and long within that single field. Sorry about that. So I just want to take a brief moment here to take a look at how SQL Server does it. And so this is SQL Server Management Studio, and in here I have set up the airports database, which is available to you. We'll put a link to it in the description on YouTube, and then also I will take a minute here to pull it up for you real quick if I can find it. But the airports database is something that you may have seen in, let's open the design here, in some of our videos. If you've watched any of the videos on geography searches in the grid component, which is the demo we're going to take a look at today. But in SQL Server, I have the data type called geography. So this field location set up as a geography data type can store things like a polygon, which would be like a perimeter of points, or a line, or a point, a lat longitude. Specifically in the airports database, location is just storing the latitude and longitude encoded as a point. But in terms of storing this data, SQL Server uses geography. I believe MySQL uses geometry, but we don't have to guess that. If we come over to documentation, under User's Guide, Databases, Geography, we have separate articles on DB2, MySQL, Oracle, Postgre, and SQL Server. So if you look at MySQL Server, creating and dropping the tables, geometry columns, the type of that location field. So it's termed location in this documentation, but what you're really looking at is this thing here. It's geometry. So Instead of a specific geography field, which would indicate that it's geospatial data, it's a geometry field, which is just spatial data, which means it could exist on any coordinate plane. Again, we only deal with geography data in Alpha Anywhere, so we're going to assume that if you're giving us a field called location with a type of geometry and we're trying to connect it to a map, that you've got geography data in there. But again, the other types of databases, DB2 has ST geometry, Oracle has an SDO geometry field type, so it's going to be different for each one. And
Hey, Sarah, would you mind grabbing those documentation links, the one you just
yeah,
sent,
I
and
can
toss them
put
to
the link
chat?
in when
All right.
I'm done explaining. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, because these all have variations, there may be some limitations on what you can do because we try to use the built-in functionality for making the queries against these databases, but sometimes there may be limitations that prevent us from being able to do exactly what we'd like to do. So where's the chat window? There we go. There's that link on
Thanks.
geographic databases. I should have gone one up. Geographic data is one up. Just go up to the parent on that thing. So this is where we've put all the information. Go back to PowerPoint. In terms of searching against that data, so you've got data, you've encoded it as a location, a point in a geometry or geography field, depending on the database. In terms of searching that, the grid has something built into it called geography search. And what that search lets you do is search those fields that have that geography data in it and do something called a polygon or a radius search. And all of this happens through a search field when it's defined as a map type in the grid. So if we go over to Alpha Anywhere, not that one, this one, I have a new workspace that I've already set up. This is running the current release 8000. And I don't have any files in here yet at all. I wanted to walk through the whole thing today of showing you how to go from connecting to your database all the way into putting this into a grid, turning on that search, and then doing the searches. So what I'd like to do is create a grid, and grids they have a data source. They always have a data source that backs them. So before we can even create the grid, we have to define a connection to our database, and that database is a SQL Server database running on my local machine. So we'll start by clicking SQL and go to AlphaDAO connection strings, and we're going to click New to create a new connection. I'm going to call it airports, and I'm going to click Build. And as I mentioned before, this is a SQL Server database. If I was using a MySQL one, I'd go up here and pick MySQL, but we're going to go SQL Server, click OK. And then I happen to know that I'm running SQL Server Express, but what I can never remember is how I define that server information here. So there's this link here you can take advantage of that explains how to do that. And particularly for SQL Server Express, there's this /SQL Express syntax. So that's where I figured out how this connection works. It's using Windows authentication, meaning that I'm logged in as me on my machine, so it's just going to use my local authentication to log in. And then the last thing we do is test success. I do need to change this to 2019, though it may not matter completely. So now that I've verified it can connect, I'll click refresh, and that will refresh this list of databases that are available. It's going to show airports automatically because that's the first one in the list, and it just happens to be the one that I need. But if it wasn't airports, if I needed Northwind, I can use this drop down to pick whatever one I need. So 2019 SQL Server Express using my Windows authentication on my local machine. I need my airports database. We test our connection. Everything works. You always want to click that test button and get a succeeded message. If you're not getting a succeeded message, there's no point in saving it because you're going to have to come back here and change it. So use that. I'll click OK. That puts my connection string in here. I'll click OK to save it. So now I have my connection to my airports database that has all the location data I want to work with. So we'll close this, and the next thing we'll do is we'll make a grid. So grid components, you can use this new button up here, either with all files or web components selected. It's a type of web component, and I know we talk a lot about the UX and not so much the grid, because the grid is specifically for web applications. It's not going to work in a mobile environment. It doesn't have support for touch interfaces. It has a lot of information in it when it's downloaded from the server. It can be slow and big and huge, and really is not designed to work in the small form factors. So this particular example will only really work in a web app. But in terms of setting up a grid, the first thing you need to do is define its data source. Now I'm running in Community Edition, so DBF tables is not an option. It has to be a SQL database. So this option will always be selected by default for you. If you have the full IDE, you can choose between these two. But in our case, we don't get a choice. The Query tab is where you set up the definition of where the database exists that you want to pull your information from for building the grid. So I'll use a named connection string. I'll click select. I'll pick airports out of this list here. Click OK and connect. And then here you have a few options of how you want to base the query to fetch the data down to display in the grid. We're just going to pull information from one table. So I'm going to click select and pick airports, US airports. It's the only table in here. Click OK, and that's it for setting up our data source. At this point, I go to fields, and if you've used the list control, this may seem pretty familiar to you because the list is also data-driven. So if we go to the Fields tab, we'll have a list of available fields we can choose from to put in this selected column, and what's in selected is what will be shown in the grid when it's rendered. So I'm just going to pick a few here. I'm going to pick code, name, city, county, and state, and we'll do a live preview so you can see that in action, what's in that data. And here's our grid. It's going to show 10 records per page. You can change that. It's all configurable and everything. But these are the airports that are in that database. Buyer beware, these are not current airports. This database was created a while ago, so it's not going to be up to date. But it's sample data to work with to experiment with features in Alpha Anywhere. So we have our grid, and now we want to do is we want to add that search piece. And to do that, you have to turn on the search, and the searching is turned on in component type. Down here, there's two checkboxes underneath the grid layout and what type of grid it is. We're going to work with the read-only today. But if you turn on the search part, this gives you access to the search section in this tree control over here. And if we come over to fields, we can take that location field, which we know is defined as a geography type, and add it and change it to a map. So search field map type. This is the field in the search for the grid that has all the geography search capabilities built into it. So we add the map, and then we go to map properties. Here's where we can configure that search fields interface. So by default, the search type will have polygon and radius as two options. The initial search type will be set to polygon. I like to change that to radius because the idea of searching for all locations within 10 miles of the current marker on the map feels like a little bit easier thing for someone to interact with first when searching on in your app than a polygon, which doesn't have instructions in the UI, but we'll show you how that works. Roadmap type. I've been using hybrid a lot lately because I like it. This does require a Google Maps API key. You have to have this, especially if you're going to initialize the center type to an address. You cannot geocode a location without an API key. I already set this up in advance. It's in my web project properties. We're not going to go look at it because I don't want to change it. But I am going to, if I can spell, I'm going to set the map center for this search map to be Chicago, Illinois, as the initial view. And I'm going to keep all the other defaults in here, which there's a lot of stuff in here that you can play around with. But that's sort of the basic setup. Deciding how you want it to be presented to the user. Do you want to use a radius or a polygon by default? Where should that map be centered? Something you should think about is if you want to center that map on an address, because it may be that you're dealing with data that only exists in a specific region. So it would be helpful to the user to center your map on that region first. Otherwise, it's going to go with the system default, which might be 0, 0 on the lat long coordinate system. It may also be Boston. I don't know. Keep the default encoding method, and we'll click OK. So that's all you need to do to set it up. The rest is all built in for you. So at this point, if we go to live preview, we will now have the ability to search our list of data down here in our grid and find airports within a radius. So if we just accept the defaults, radius 1 miles, and click search, this will filter our grid down. There's not going to be any results at this location. There's no airports within this area. But if we were to increase this to 10 miles and then click set to zoom that map out and then search, we're going to find a couple airports in the Chicago area. And before we go here, I am going to change the layout on this so that we can view the grid and the search side by side. If you guys have never seen this before, the grids use a thing called a master template, and there's a couple of default layouts in here for you, and one of them is table horizontal layout. So table, HTML table horizontal layout, meaning the search and the grid will be side by side, and if there was a detailed view associated with those grid rows, it would also appear next to the grid. So we'll just set that up real quick and look at this again. So here's our list of data. Here's our search options over here. Radius search I mentioned, pretty easy to think about initially. The second option in here is called polygon, and the way this works with this search control is you click on the map and it places markers while you click, and once you get to 3 points, it's able to create a polygon shape. And you can add as many as you'd like, but this rectangle, or not rectangle, this 5-sided shape here, this represents the area that will be searched, and these markers can be moved. If you don't like the area you selected, you can click clear and try again. But effectively what happens is everything in this polygon, when we click search, only the airports that fall within that are going to appear. So that's a polygon search. So that's the basic look at how that built-in functionality works with the grid. There are extra features you can do. You can turn on like showing the locations on the search part that match like within there. Or if you'd prefer, you can turn on grid alternate views to display your data as a map. So then when your search is done, it'll just show you the map markers on the as the grid itself as that data. But those are that's what you can do with it. In terms of the underlying implementation, though, how it works, this is sort of the core of what I wanted to get at today is how did we do this? And this is all done through the use of portable SQL geography functions. So portable SQL is sort of a generalized list of functions that we've created to provide a common language, just common SQL language and functionality for doing queries against a variety of data sources. If you've never used SQL before, then you wouldn't know this, but each database system out there, SQL Server, MySQL, SQLite, they all have implemented their own special flavor of SQL, structured query language. and nothing is portable. There are some statements that are some basic stuff. You might get lucky. I'm realizing that my microphone isn't down low enough, but it might work just copying, pasting between different systems, but by and large, it doesn't. So portable SQL is our answer to that. So you write queries in Alpha Anywhere using portable SQL, and then it doesn't matter what the system is that you're going to go against. We handle all of that for you on the back end. We take your portable SQL query and we figure out how to make that query in the language, the SQL query language used by your database system. So the geography functions, they all start with GEOG, but there's a bunch you can work with. And in the specific case of geography search, those two searches are done with two special functions. Geolocation is within radius, and geolocation is within polygon. And with both of these, there are supporting functions, create location, create polygon, that are used to do the search. So we come back to the documentation. Look at radius first. And this page, I'm sure someone's going to ask for the link. It is off of that main tree, the parent, but here we go. Put that in there. Radius is a portable SQL function that takes a location as geography, geography being the term that we use to describe the data type of that field in the database. So in SQL Server, it's a geography field, but as we saw with MySQL, it's actually geometry. But in both of those cases, we're talking about the same thing. So the location has to be that type of field, as does the point that we're searching about. So that Chicago, Illinois point has to be passed in as a geography data type as well. And then it needs a radius. Radius is meters when we're talking about geography. We make no guarantees that it's always going to be meters. You're going to want to double check with your database system, but generally it's meters. And then there's this fourth parameter that doesn't get used very often, but it's tolerance. Some sort of like fuzzy, like how accurate do we want this to be when you're talking about points. So tolerance could also be something that you add in. We don't use that in the grid when we run the queries, but that is available to you if you want to use it in your own queries. And to show you how the grid handles it, if we come back to design, go to properties on the grid and scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's this advanced section and you can say, show query statements on AJAX callbacks. If you turn this on, it'll show you the SQL that the portable SQL that gets generated when those searches happen. And you may not be able to see this when I run this in live preview. But if we come back to that example of the 10-mile radius search, and we click search, up here at the top, you'll see this text. It says select first 11 something something something, where geolocation is within radius. Location is the name of the field in the table, and then geog create location with two values passed in. This is the latitude and the longitude of this point on the map. And then finally, this number at the end is 10 miles formatted or translated to meters. So if we change this to kilometers instead, set it in search, you'll see it says 10,000 here. So instead of 1,000 meters a kilometer, so that's 10,000 meters there. So that's the where clause that's being generated for a radius search. A polygon search is similar, but it's gonna look more complicated because each one of these points gets passed in as a latitude, longitude value, and the precision on that is rather high. If we do a search here, we'll see the where is now create geolocation is within polygon, passing in the location field as the first value. And then the second value is that geog create polygon function is a supporting function, and the locations are passed in as a comma delimited list of latitude, longitude, latitude, longitude. So let's go back to the doc real quick and look at that polygon. Here it is. So here's that create polygon. It returns a geography data type, and it takes latitude and longitude. And if you have more than 1 point, which I assume you would if you're doing a polygon, then you would add another it takes longitude, latitude. I got that backwards. Longitude, latitude, longitude, latitude. Important to know that. Make sure you're familiar with this before you tell people about it. So here's an example of that. Those pairings. This SRID thing, a spatial reference ID, is only going to be important in databases like MySQL where you're not using the system default. This SRID stuff, you can look it up online. We can, I don't think it's linked in here, though it may not be. I don't think we linked it in. Oh, no, we do. All right. So if you go to the geographic databases section down in here, we talk about what those SRID tags mean, spatial reference identifiers, and then we have a link to Wikipedia that lists a bunch of them. Because the MySQL uses a geometry field and not a geography field, that ID is used to define what coordinate system the data refers to. But again, we're working with geography data here, so we're going to assume that these are all latitude, longitude values that get stored in your database if you're using them with our geography, geometry functions. So we can keep going, and I can keep talking about this stuff, but I did want to open it for questions because talking about these things, understanding how geography search works, translating that data, storing it, it can be tricky if you're unfamiliar with working with your database system and it's not your forte. So I did want to open up for questions at this point before experimenting with other things.
Excellent. So just to go back to what you do need Google, or you need an API key for
You
this.
do need a Google API key.
And
That is a
someone
good point.
says,
I did not
is
tell
this
you how to do that.
a paid account? And my answer to that is always, it's sort of. Generally speaking, I think this is still the case. When you get a Google account with an API key, there is a free tier in which they'll give you a certain number of dollars that you can spend with Google to make those API calls. It might be a couple $100 a month or something like that. So if it's a low volume thing, you may end up paying nothing to use the
So
Google
yeah,
Maps.
with the Google Maps API, this changed a couple years ago. They do require that you set up a billing profile before you can get an API key. And it's a scary sound because they ask you for a credit card, but you get a very large number of free API calls basically with the Google Maps API key per year, per month even. So you're not going to really go over that probably in testing some of this stuff. But that is a change that happened recently. You used to be able to get an API key and just use it. If you don't need to geocode these points here, if you're not using Polygon, if you're not using this, the search to geocode locations, if you already have that data, you can get away with just running without one. They do let you do some things in a developer mode.
Mhm. Excellent, thanks. The other question is, when you were doing that airport search earlier, it did show you airports, but it had a lot of other points of interest on the map. Is there a way you could shut off the icons for like the hospitals and gas stations and
Yeah,
stuff like
so that's one of the reasons why I'll make this big. But
that? Okay.
those are labels. You
Uh-huh.
turn off labels here on the map,
Oh, I see.
which turns off everything. But
But you
there
might
there
still
are
want
other map
straight.
modes where you could just do terrain,
Uh-huh.
and that if you zoom in, you're still gonna have that information. But yeah, there's some customization you can do with this. Let's go back and look at that search field to see if there are options in here specifically to turn that off. I don't remember what Premiere is.
Hmm.
It doesn't, nothing's really jumping out at me
Yeah.
for turning that information off. But you can
Yeah.
do something like with a satellite map, and there may or may not be an option in here to turn off those options. It might not be something we've exposed.
Right.
Yeah.
So, excellent. Well,
Yeah.
so not easily, I guess is the answer.
Yeah. So it looks like if
Yeah.
I
You
pick
could shut them
satellite,
all off, but
shut
you're
them
not
off.
gonna,
It
yeah.
shuts them all off, so you don't have any reference here.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be particularly
Yeah.
helpful. You
So like
probably
if
want to
it's
see
just
roads
a
or something.
roadmap. So
Yeah.
the nice thing about the geography search is it's not specifically like you don't have to use Google for your map to
Hmm.
display your results. If you have another map um, control out that you're using that you've integrated, uh, the search will tell you what the data is that you need to plot, and then you can just plot it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. This is just sort of a general layout question, and it was, well, actually, no, let's talk about the fact that we're doing all of this in a grid.
Hmm.
So is this available? I'm guessing this is not available, at least as easy as this in a UX. Is that
It's not
correct?
as easy to do this in a list, and
Okay.
unfortunately, like my original ambition was to show you guys how to do that, but there's a few steps involved. So
Okay.
I wanted to at least talk about how the portable SQL is used um,
Right. Today was
to
about how
give
you
you an
do the
idea.
searching
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
stuff
The
in that.
list does support doing searching. It'll have to be a server-side search because these are queries done in the database.
Hmm.
But you can set that up to do your own searches. In terms of this interface over here of like clicking to place points of a polygon, I need to do a little more research on our map control to see um, how we can do that, if it's easy to accomplish or if it's going to require a bit of effort on your part to write in some JavaScript.
Cool. So now here on this map, you have, it looks like 3 different markers
Hmm.
there. Would it be possible to create a scenario where, let's say you have a list on the right, like you kind of do here. I know it's a grid, and you had a checkbox, and you checked 2 or 3 options from that, and they showed up on the map. So it wouldn't be quite a search; it would be more of a display, I guess.
To display selected places on a map?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but it's gonna require, so I think if you wanted to do where you checked some boxes like in a
Hmm.
list,
Yeah,
and then display those on a map, that's going to be more easily done with a list uh, and
with
a
a
map
list control
control in
in a
the
UX.
UX.
So
Yeah,
so do
because
it there, but not in a grid. But it can be done in alpha. It's just that that's the
it can be
right.
done in alpha.
Hmm.
The grid map, there's an alternate view that displays your data as a map.
Hmm.
And the grid does offer some search filtering. Let's very quickly see if we can figure this out. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on alternate views for the grid. And an alternate view for a grid is synonymous with multiple layouts for a list.
Hmm.
And it's this alternate views option in properties. You have to turn it on, and then you have to define one, and we'll add one called map. We'll pick select, we'll say map. We'll call it map, map view for its ID and its label. And I believe we'll just accept all the defaults here. Oh, I need to specify an address. Okay, so we do need to define the location. So we need to define the latitude expression, which is just the latitude field, which I'll insert field here. So that's all I need to do here. Do a longitude, insert longitude. And for the title, we'll insert the airport code. And for the info box expression, we'll do name. And we'll just keep it simple for now. And then layer expression is optional. Don't need to define that. And click OK. So that's all I need there. If we live preview this, we'll have a grid that has a tab up top. So now if we click on map view, these are these records plotted on a map. If we apply the search here, there's our Chicago search. We look at the map view now. These are just those airports that fit in that search area. But the thing I wanted to look at was the grid has something called a checkbox column, if I remember correctly. Let's see if we can find it. Search properties has checkbox select column. It's in layout options, so we'll click find. And we're at the top, so we'll turn that on. Expand it. Single page. Let's make it multiple pages. And then I think there's a way through action buttons. Go down here and add an action button. Oh, filter. Button text. Filter grid. It's a JavaScript action. We'll use action JavaScript. Maybe it's search. It is not search. No. I know there's a way. This is not going to do what I want it to do. I know there is a way to take the fields that you've checked and then filter. So if you check these three things, there's a way to filter the grid to only display those. So then at that point, that would give you your map view with just those selected items. But I'm gonna have to dig into that more to figure that out.
Okay, thanks. Let's see what else. Oh, here's a question and something we've done before. And how would you go about it if you had a database, let's say a SQL database, and it's got addresses in it, and you would like to figure out the lat long for those addresses and store them in that database, and you kind of want to do it as a bulk operation? How would you go about writing a script that would do something like that?
So there's two options. And if you've got a grid and it's editable, so let's make this editable. Look at the component type, updatable. I have to go to the grid and go to grid fields and change the settings there. Go to fields. All right. Editable. Okay. Let's throw in location. Location is the place where we've stored things. Latitude and longitude. Noticing that this is hidden by default. Okay, I better put the primary key in there, otherwise it's not going to know how to deal with that. So here's our data and our grid. There's our ID, code, name, city, state, country, latitude, longitude. Location is hidden because we detect that it's a geography or geometry field, and we don't have a way to render that as a text box other than just showing you the raw binary data, which is meaningless because you're not going to know what it says. But this location field has a geography field info option here where you tell it what the names of the fields are that contain the data to encode in this location. So this would be latitude. Well, you have to specify it as longitude, latitude, so it would be longitude, latitude. Okay. So by setting that, every time we make an edit to the latitude and longitude, it will encode that location somewhere else, so we can go, we'll save that real quick. Let's just save this, airports. If we come back to live preview, and we'll just pick our first one here. This is Stone Mountain, Georgia. So let's go to, let's change our center. Oh, then there's a center button. It lets you recenter your map. So we'll go to Stone Mountain, GA. And if we search real quick, let's make that a bit bigger. Set. So there's our Stone Mountain guy here. If we came over here on this latitude and longitude field now, and we change this to something crazy, like 31, -70, and submit that. For starters, this isn't going to be in Georgia anymore. We come over to our map view though. Oops, did I save it? I did. Let's go ahead and clear out this search. Map view right here, that 00A, that's Stonebridge, that's the point we just changed. So that's encoding the data for me. And let's see here, if we can figure out somewhere nearby. Can go to Bermuda. So there's Bermuda. Let's go with 1,000-mile radius. Seems like it should capture that point. Search, and there it is. So this just proves that latitude and longitude were encoded in the location field, because this search is going against that location and not the latitude longitude value. So the grid will do it for you. But if you need to create a bunch of them, you can use this geog create location function. And if we come back to the documentation and we come back over to, where is it? Oh, I moved off of it here. I'll go back. Let's go look at SQL Server specific geography tasks. Inserting location data values. We have a sample SQL syntax here you can use to insert the location value. You do not need that piece for the SQL Server, but it's essentially you're going to insert into or update into your table that value. So key value would be the ID, the primary key field, and then location is the field that you're encoding that data in, and you're going to say values and just the encoded data. So that's insert, but update, you would have a where clause. You'd say where key value equals, and then item 1 would be your key. But that's a way you could script it. And we do have a how to bulk geocode addresses in a database. This is for getting the latitude and longitude values out and saving the latitude and longitude. But if you look down here, we also have an example on how you would do that with the create location field using arguments, and this in this while loop would iterate over all of that data for you.
Excellent. So there's also an XBasic function maybe that you want to put out, the Geocode Address.
So Geocode Address takes an address and goes out to Google or whatever endpoint you want to use that we support, and it returns the latitude and longitude value for the address.
Yep.
You need to have the latitude and the longitude value to encode a location. So
To
if
do
you're
the
starting
encoding.
with an address, you do need to use that geocode address function first.
Right. So there are three levels. There's the address, then there's the lat long, and then there's the encoded geometry geospatial value.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Let me see what else we've got. I think this is it at the moment for questions. I think there's some other stuff that you wanted to cover before we broke for these questions.
Other stuff I wanted to cover.
Or is that it?
I'm blinking. There are other things I want to cover. DevCon's coming up. If you haven't bought your DevCon tickets, you need to do so soon.
Do so before the price goes
Soon.
up.
Today.
Yeah.
Prices are going up. I don't know if we've actually updated the pricing page yet, so you could take advantage of last month's awesome deal now if you hurry. And I do recommend attending. We're gonna try harder and do more amazing things. So it's gonna be one you don't want to miss. Remote. I know people are upset that we're not doing it in person, but again, COVID risks.
Yep.
It's really hard, or it's a lot of work. It's not hard. It's just a lot of work to plan an in-person event and then have the high risk of it having to be canceled or at least remote only because of pandemic reasons. I think it's just easier at this time to avoid the hassles of trying to cancel flights and refund hotel fees if that were to happen, and stick to being remote this year.
So we do have one other map question, and this is sort of a troubleshooting question. And this person has got an API key, and they've pasted it into the Alpha Anywhere Google Maps API key field, where they're supposed to put it, but they get an invalid API key error when they're in preview. How would you think about troubleshooting something like that?
So the question, if you've added it, and so I did run into this once, and I think it was just the system hadn't gotten it yet because then it started working. But I was in here in properties, or no, I was in here in fields, and my map wasn't working. And so I went and I got the API key, and I went and I put it in all the possible places you can put a Google Maps API key in the project settings.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't sure which one it was. Because we have a field for, here, let's make a new project and look at it. I don't want to show you my API key, so we'll come back to here. We'll go File, New Project. Delete this project later.
And that does actually bring up a question as to where do you put those API keys? And it looks like it's one stored at the project level.
Yeah, so if you're on the web projects control panel, or the control panel if you're in Community Edition, if you go to project properties and you come down, there's a section called JavaScript libraries, and in here you have Google Maps API key, Google Static Maps API key, which is the API key used if you're going to display a static map in a list control. And then there's one more called Google Geocoding API key. These can all be the same API key if you've turned on all of those services for that API key. They can be separate API keys if you prefer to work that way, but these are the three places you need to put up. The geocoding one is the one piece that I was missing when I was building my grid initially, because I had given it an address, and in order to geocode an address, you have to have an API key.
I see.
Yeah. Some of the more general stuff like putting a marker on the map, Google will actually just let you do that in a development environment if it detects that you're running on localhost, not in a deployed environment. But or maybe a little bit. It's going to say developer version all over it, and the only way to get rid of that is with an API key. But this Maps API key is going to be what you need for plotting markers, routing, that kind of thing. But this is the place where you need to put it. If you've added it and you're getting an error that it's not correct, the first thing I would recommend trying is saving all your work and restarting Alpha Anywhere, just in case it just hasn't propagated in the system. Because sometimes happens, especially a lot with if you're working with XBasic class, if you're building an XBasic class, when it's loaded into the IDE, if you don't force a reload, it doesn't use your new code if you've made changes. So having to know about how to reload an XBasic class during development is required. My suspicion is what happened to me earlier when I did this and then went and tried it in my grid is that the grid just hadn't fetched a new new information out of the web project properties.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and restarting it seemed to fix that. If you're still having problems, double check that you've turned on the correct services for that API key. Make sure that if you're using geocoding, that you've enabled the geocoding service.
Cool. All right, and another question has come in, and it is, can you use that geospatial data in the UX list control using the map view? Or does the map just take that long?
The map just takes that long. You can plot KML data. There is no geospatial data plotting. And in fact, in that search here in our airports demo, we were looking at it, that those points, those are all just map markers added to Google Map. Oh, sorry, hold on. I'm not in the default project where my Google Maps API key is.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And hopefully I don't have to, hopefully that hasn't caused an issue for me.
And answering this has raised yet another question.
There you go, look at that, request denied.
Okay.
I've changed my settings, but it didn't pick up that I went back to my old one, so we're gonna.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna save that. We're just gonna restart it. That's okay. Oh, as an aside, we just published an update to the Universal Installer, and it's gonna look different from documentation until I get on there and update all the images for you. It's now gonna use whatever the Windows windowing API is. I'm running Windows 11, so it's got these weird rounded borders and drop shadows and stuff. But next time you open it, it's going to ask you to update, and you might see just some border changes. Nothing functional about it is different. So we were working with this guy here, and I was using geospatial search. We were in Grid Airports demo. Yeah, I'd like to start live preview. Oh, I need to. For whatever reason, on Windows 11, and I haven't asked anybody else, but when first time I launched live preview right now, it goes to the background and brings up a different app. I've never seen this before, and I've not seen anybody complain about it yet. So I think it might be specific to me. So anyway, we were talking about this. This geometry shape is drawn as like a circle around a point, and that's all done through the Google Map API. There's no actual geography information from your database plotted here. That being said, you can plot it. We'll have to do some research on that for you. KML, I forget what the KML stands for. It's a overlay format supported by Google Maps.
Markup language, a type of XML for geospatial data. Is that correct? I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, you can use that to overlay stuff on this map, and certainly pull from it if you wanted to use it for searching for a polygon.
Excellent. All right, let's see what else we've got here. That's it. Oh, someone pointed out that that little quirky thing does not happen to them in Windows 11, so it may in fact just be you.
It might just be me. I come up with all sorts of ways that this product misbehaves on regular. Yeah. But I've got like, I don't know, 30 different versions of Alpha Anywhere installed too. So
thank goodness for the Universal Installer.
Oh gosh, I love that thing.
Yeah.
It makes it so much easier to keep track of what I've got, what I'm testing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, where are things located? Before it was like, I don't remember where I put things or if I installed them, so then I'd install them again.
We come up with clever naming techniques and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, it looks like we are out of questions. If a question does come to you, whenever, of course, you can send it to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. Sarah, thanks very much for presenting today. Thanks for everyone for showing up and asking questions. We hope to see you next Wednesday at our next Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. Until then, stay well. Bye-bye.